had no idea how quickly gas started to go bad when it wasn't in well-sealed containers. The Humvees could handle dirtier fuel than most modern cars, but even now, the engines pinged after the last siphoning of gas from a car on the side of the road. We added fuel additive at each fill-up, but we only had 7 bottles left. Grizz was the first to point out that vehicles would be obsolete within another couple of years. Everyone would be walking, riding bicycles, and riding horses, assuming horses weren't extinct by then. I dreaded the day cars became nothing more than lawn ornaments, and prayed we had a permanent home, free of Zeds, before the gasoline became no longer usable. In the twilight, I glanced over to where Deb was setting down a pot filled with something steaming onto an aluminum camp-style picnic table. As if on cue, my stomach growled. I jumped off the ATV and headed straight for the food line. Jace pulled Hallie to her feet. Earlier, with Jace standing watch behind her, she had set up a cozy camp for Benji, his cot surrounded by teddy bears. The boy, oblivious to their actions, was propped against a snoring Diesel and completely engrossed with his new toys. Jace clapped once, and Diesel shot up. A startled Benji looked around. Jace pointed to the table where Frost stood, waiting for the kid. "Dinner time, Benny boy." Benji's face broke into a wide grin. He jumped to his feet and took off running toward his grandfather. He wasn't a fast kid, but every time food was involved, he'd come close to breaking his personal speed records. He slid into being the first in line, just like he did every meal. No one minded. Spoiling Benji was one of the few joys in this new world. In the large soup pot was all the pasta that had survived the rats and mice. The noodles had no real sauce, only olive oil and spices found in the restaurant, but it all tasted pretty dang good to me. Grizz and Frost stood guard while the rest of us ate. Benji slurped the noodles while he fed Diesel one strand of spaghetti at a time. I twirled my noodles around my fork, savoring every bite. Jace finished first, as usual, and he always went back for seconds. Marco tossed his styrofoam bowl and plastic fork into a plastic bag. He stood and motioned to Frost and Grizz. "I'll take watch now for one of you guys." It was standard operating procedure to have someone stand watch 24/7. We always had at least 2 people guard over our group. Even inside a building like this. Especially inside a building like this. Grizz grabbed his dinner and sat down next to Vicky. She didn't even acknowledge him. I remembered the exact moment her personality had changed from kind and optimistic to cold and hard. It was the moment when Tyler was killed. She hadn't smiled since. Deb burped and covered her mouth. "Excuse me," she mumbled. Vicky had mentioned first pregnancies were even harder once a woman was in her 30s. Deb was 34 and couldn't keep much of anything down. She was losing weight too quickly, and I worried how much longer she could go without losing the baby. "Another tummy ache?" Benji asked. Deb gave a small smile and nodded. "Mom gives me warm milk when my tummy hurts." His face fell. He said the same thing every time he noticed Deb wasn't feeling well. I knew what Benji was going to say next. We all knew. "I miss Mom." Diesel always seemed to notice when Benji's mood faltered, and the dog nudged the boy with his big shiny nose. Benji scowled and wiped the slobber from his arm. The boy's features soon eased, and he rubbed the dog's ears. When he went back to his eating/feeding the dog routine, we ate and talked about our findings as well as tomorrow's plans. "There's a truck rental company not far from here, so maybe it wasn't destroyed," I said. "I rented a truck once to move into my house." As soon as I said the words, a weight fell on my chest. I'd been so caught up in keeping busy that my mind didn't have the time to dwell on the past. My house, an adorable little bungalow I'd been fixing up, was likely a pile of stones sitting fewer than 10 miles from here. My parents' house, not far from downtown, would have faced the same fate. I still hated myself for not coming back for them. Not only had I left them behind, but also I never came back for them. I had planned to. In the first days, all I thought about was how I could get back into the city to find them. My dad was a doctor, my mother a nurse, and a diabetic. Even though they were both retired, I knew they would have been at the hospital, helping out where they could, in the most dangerous place of all. Still, I had tried to work out a plan to make it to them. Then the news had come that the military had bombed Des Moines and all other large cities. They never stood a chance. Still, not having the chance to say goodbye, not trying to save them, would be something I would have to live with for the rest of my life. I sensed someone watching me, and I noticed Clutch sitting in a camp chair. He motioned to the empty chair next to him. I dumped off my bowl and fork and headed to the seat Clutch had saved. I sunk into the seat and my muscles loosened. Clutch pointed to the night sky through the open roof. "Looks like we're going to have quite a full moon tonight." I looked upward. The moon seemed as though it was racing to claim the sky, even before the sun relinquished its fleeting hold. The days are getting too short. Soon the days will be shorter than the nights. We sat as darkness bled out from every corner in the building. Small lanterns were lit, and light licked at the dark. Without any light to mar its beauty, the moon became a brilliant pearl. With night came the beasts, the animals that came out of hiding after the Zeds migrated. With little to fear, they searched to fill their empty stomachs. A howl in the distance was returned by another. These weren't the coyote howls from old westerns. These howls sounded like madmen, as though the demons of the night were cackling at what the world had become, taunting us that humans were no longer the most feared predators on the planet. The howls had become familiar, but they still unnerved me, especially when they were the only sound of the night. Trying to ignore the distant wails, I focused intently on the moon. The iridescent pearl was stained by moonspots, and I wondered how each of those scars came to be. I mused if someone on the moon could see similar scars on the Earth from all the bombings and fires. I spoke softly. "Do you think the Earth will ever be a place where we can live without fear?" "Don't know," Clutch said. "But if we don't believe things will get better, why do we keep trying?" "Yeah," I whispered. "I guess you're right." As Clutch dozed off, I pulled out a small mirror and reflected the moonlight in it. The way the light shimmered and reflected in the glass would have made a pretty picture, if only I had a working camera. Instead, I focused on remembering this moment, of the peaceful moonlit night and Clutch at my side. Moonlight reflected off the stand of mirrors hanging nearby, all containing mirrors identical to the little one I held. A reflection beyond the stand caught my eye. I leaned forward. As I turned the mirror to move the light around, I noticed even more reflections scattered around the dark building. Grizz, nearing the end of his shift, paused to take in the reflections. One of the reflections blinked. I clicked the safety off my rifle. "Grizz, you see that?" "Yeah," he replied, as he took a step back and did a 360. "The Humvees. We need to get to them, now." I nudged Clutch, and he came awake with a deep inhalation. He grunted and rubbed his neck. I held a finger to my lips. Shh. I could see his frown in the moonlight as he took in the situation. He let out the breath he'd been holding in a rush. Slowly, I stood and walked over to Jace. A howl inside the building woke him up before I could get there.